Hello, everybody, and welcome to Global Vegfest. You've tuned in to the Vivas live stream. So Vivas is a global community and media brand for vegan women driven by compassion, purpose, and a bit of sparkle. We're delighted to have the opportunity to curate 2 live streams throughout this Global Vegfest event throughout the weekend. We had one yesterday, and if you missed it, don't worry, it was all recorded and you can watch that at any time on the Vegfest UK website and Facebook page. And I do encourage you to do so, because we had some wonderful, brilliant discussions yesterday. So the purpose of the Vivas live streams is to showcase the voices and talents of vegan women across the globe. And I'm delighted to kick off our sessions. I'm Katrina Fox, by the way, if I didn't mention, I'm the founder of Vivas, and I'm delighted to introduce our very first panel for this live stream, which is on the veganization of yoga. It's led by the brilliant, wonderful vegan pioneer, Victoria Moran, and 2 other wonderful women who are also yoga teachers and yoga students, looking to bring ahimsa, non-violence, and veganism into yoga. And they're going to talk about what they're having to come up against, and also how you can help to incorporate veganism into your yoga communities. So I'm delighted to welcome Victoria and guests.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody around the world. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm Victoria Moran. I'm the director of Main Street Vegan Academy, host of the Main Street Vegan podcast, and I've been in yoga just about 53 years. My fellow panelists are Holly Scotus, who is the founder of Yoga is Vegan, a project and podcast dedicated to inspiring yogas to go vegan. And she's in Connecticut. I'm in New York, so we're a little bit close geographically. And then we are calling on a wonderful additional panelist from the country where yoga was born. And she is Acharya Samhita Rathore, a traditional yoga teacher and founder of the Yogarpanam, who is committed to passing on the yoga tradition as taught to her by her guru, TKV Deshikachar. And Acharya Samhita is going to open with a traditional yogic blessing. Samhita.
Sahana bhavatu, sahanau bhunaktu, sahaviryam karavavahai, tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I'd quickly like to explain this prayer. It's a beautiful prayer. Normally in the beginning of every study that we have, exchange that we have, we chant this prayer, and it just simply means, may we nurture each other, may we protect each other, may we give energy, vigor, vitality to each other, and may we see eye to eye, and may there be peace, peace, peace. We say peace 3 times, because peace for me, peace for my immediate environment, and peace for the entire cosmos. So it's a beautiful prayer.
Thank you so much, Samhita. Beautiful indeed. So we're going to each speak a little bit from our perspectives on the veganization of yoga. We're going to start with Holly Scotus, and she is Yoga is Vegan. And if you want to follow her on Instagram, she is at Yoga is Vegan. Holly.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you. Thank you for everyone showing up. I started Yoga is Vegan after going into a 500-hour teacher training. And during that training, my teacher said something that shifted my life, shifted the perspective of how I see yoga and veganism. And they asked, is your refrigerator a morgue? And it was at that moment of asking that question that all of a sudden, the reality of what was on your plate, the history, the involvement became really important because it allowed me to then understand what the truth was behind what was happening. I seem to be getting a little feedback. Sorry, you guys hear me? Samita, can you mute your?
Yes, if Samita, if you and I both mute, we'll be good for Holly.
There we go. Okay, we'll try this again. Anyway, so when I did my first 500-hour teacher training, and this was back in 2014, I was mostly plant-based. I was already sold on the health benefits because I had turned my own life around eating a whole food plant-based diet. And I did this 500-hour teacher training with Sri Dharma Mitra because the requirement was that we needed to be vegan during the duration of the training. And that was a 6-month training. And on that first day, hopefully you could hear me before, but I'm going to repeat it because it was probably the most poignant thing that shifted my relationship to food and how I see it in the yoga practice. And he asked everyone sitting in the room if our refrigerator was a morgue. And I thought that's the most important thing, because the moment you open up your refrigerator, you are then met with truthfulness. And you're met with this idea that what we put into our bodies, what we choose to do, has a history and an importance. And so during that time, we shifted to something called sattvic foods, which are more healthy, life-giving foods. And during this practice, we sat there and started to pick foods that brought life and vibrancy versus foods that were either dead, like a processed food, or dead because there was a history. And that's when I learned the importance that 3 meals a day can become a yoga practice, because often we think of yoga, especially in the West, as a practice that is a physical, postures only. But yoga is so much more important beyond that. It is tapping into oneness with universal consciousness. And the way that we can do that is by being aware, being conscious, being direct with our choices every time we sit down to eat, to snack. It gives us an opportunity to have reverence for what's there and to start to begin to understand our relationship to nature and how our actions or karma is then going to have a future importance on our planet, on our relationship to nature, on our relationship to other beings. And so finding that, being part of that, and coming up with a little bit of resistance in the yoga community, I found that when we can do it in a way where it's bringing food to a class or showing what you're doing through example and not shaming, we allow people to start having this practice as well. And I think that's what's important to understand. Yoga is a practice. It's not perfect. We don't go advanced. You don't stick your foot behind your head the first time you do yoga, but you can start to make different choices right as you sit down to eat. When you begin the day, how is what I'm going to put on my plate? How is that a right food choice? And does it reflect and change my relationship to other beings? And what I noticed happening from doing that is that things started to unfold. The practice started getting deeper. And when I got off track, I'd feel it. I'd feel how different foods, whether it was more processed food or something not full of life, fruits and vegetables, grains and sprouts, but you could feel them in your body. You can feel it in the mind. But the more that you start to align with better, right foods, the practice starts to unfold. And just as being vegan, we start to see the importance. And every single creature, we do exactly the same, but opposite, through pairing the practice of yoga and food. Victoria, on to you.
I'm sorry, my mute button was hidden. Holly, bless you. That was profound and beautiful. Thank you so very much. And now we're going to move to Samita, and I'll give you her Instagram as well. It is at Yogar Panam, Yogar PANAM, and I will be putting those in the comments section as well. Samita.
Hi, Victoria. Hi, Holly. And hi, everybody. I'm in India right now, and I'm going to take over from what Holly said. I will just share with you. You see, I come from a family that followed yoga, and my grandfather was a yogi. He was a doctor with the British Army in those days. And I learned one thing as a kid. Everybody thinks that yoga, as Holly was saying, is about postures and about the breathing and about, how much you can bend backwards and forwards. But yoga is actually a way of life. It's a way of living. And there's a beautiful quote by my teacher, Desikachar, that yoga is not about asanas, it is not about pranayama, it is not about dhyana, but it is the way we connect with ourselves. Now, the way we connect with ourselves is a very, very foundational, integral part and aspect of yoga, because our connection with ourselves is totally dependent on our environment inside and our environment outside. So, for example, okay, if you are, you're just hanging around and it's like really, really hot and you start sweating, nobody's going to be comfortable. Okay. Similarly, all the inputs that we take inside could create a lot of heat in our body. And when heat is created, it can create restlessness, it can create agitation, it can mess around with the organs of the body. And this is just one example, because, in yoga, we have the concept of dvandva. It's a Sanskritam word, but it means, if there's backwards, then there's forward, there's up, there's down. So just imagine what happens when we consume something which creates excess heat in the body. And this excess heat, the next form of heat, is vapor. So vapor is nothing but air, and air starts bloating the body. And then it goes into all kinds of issues. So I'm just taking one example and trying to just, drive home a point that it's so important to give our body nurturing sattvic food, because if I can't have a connect with my own self, then how am I going to connect with the world outside? And the whole concept of yoga, the first ground rule of yoga is ahimsa. And ahimsa is non-violence. And non-violence begins with me. How can I expect to behave in a certain manner with the universe outside if I don't have a good connect with myself? And I think the inputs, and input would be food. What we intake is so integral, but it begins with the food, because we have the 5 layers, as many of you would know. The physical layer, which is the first layer of the body, which is the annamaya, we call it. Annam in Sanskrit means food, the food sheath, you see. So we are nothing but, chemicals and nutrition. So if we don't intake the right food, then again, it's going to create a lot of issues with, psychological well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being. And also, I think that when we talk food, it's not just food, but it's a way of living, it's a way of life. And whatever we intake has to be gentle, has to be kind. And yeah, there's something out here. Okay, I missed that. But yeah, I mean, it's no rocket science, right? I mean, like, who doesn't want to feel comfortable? And if it's the basic, like, how can we see something suffering out there and it's causing suffering in our own body? And my Vedanta teacher, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, he would always make a joke, and he would tell us in class that don't make your body a graveyard for dead animals, because it's just putrid, it's just gonna stay there. And each to their own, it not telling anybody what to eat and consume, but these are facts. And I just feel for a wholesome yoga practice, the consumption of food is merely a thought process of being compassionate and kind. So, I think This is something I would advise all my yoga friends, students, practitioners who are trying. They may come from different backgrounds. To just give it a little thought. Just think about it, and yeah, and I think that says it all. If you would want to add anything, but I just feel a lot in my heart about simple. I mean, there is no rocket science. Again, just be kind. Just be kind. Just be compassionate. That's it.
I muted instead of unmuting. Hi, everybody. Victoria again, and I'll take my little part starting with my story. I discovered yoga when looking for God in the Kansas City, Missouri Public Library, where I grew up. I was 17. There were 3 books on yoga available at that time. And one thing that they all agreed on was that if a person was going to be serious about yoga, they would have to be vegetarian. And that resonated with me. I'd heard that word vegetarian years before, and I knew there was something in it for me, even though I had never met one. But I was able to move to London just out of high school, where there were vegetarians and vegetarian restaurants and actual yoga classes. So with the combination of yoga and vegetarianism being available, I was able to do that. Now, I had never heard of veganism, but I did about 3 years later when I had moved back to the States. And interestingly enough, at that time, the monthly journal of the American Vegan Society was called Ahimsa. And I saw this beautiful connection between what I had been taught as yoga's first moral precept. And I loved how Samhita called it the first ground rule. That's beautiful. And this vegan organization. And I have to admit that it took me several years to make it to vegan. I did lots of backsliding, but finally getting there, there's so much freedom in knowing not only that I'm making the ethical choice, but that I'm making the spiritual choice that's also going to support my own progress, as well as saving lives and making the world kinder. So where we are today, as I see it in the yoga world, and it's kind of funny because when I was young, there was no yoga world. I kind of watched the yoga world happen, although it's really the yoga Western world, as I'm sure Samhita could tell us. But there are some vegans, and the work of people such as Holly with Yoga is Vegan. Vegan yoga systems like Jivamukti are doing so much to get this picture of pure ahimsa, going all the way with ahimsa into the yoga picture. And so there are some vegans, and there are some vegetarians, because yoga traditionally has been vegetarian. A good kind of vegetarian, no eggs and no fish. Sometimes we get people saying, oh, I'm vegetarian, but I eat, well, practically everything. But a yogic vegetarian is a pure vegetarian. Dairy has been allowed. And I think what's so interesting there is trying to honor this tradition and how things were 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, and how things are today, and that there is evolution even in spiritual systems as well as in our personal lives. And then, of course, today in the West, we certainly run into people who practice yoga, who are prominent in yoga, who aren't vegetarian. I remember a conversation with one who was telling me, oh, isn't it great now that there's humane farming, we don't have to be vegetarian anymore. And I remember somebody, this was Madame Blavatsky, who was a theosophist back in the 1800s, and somebody said to her, well, what's wrong with eating meat? And she said, well, I suppose nothing if you don't want to slow down your spiritual growth. Well, I think there's plenty wrong with it besides slowing down your spiritual growth. But I did think of that quotation when I was speaking with this beautiful yoga teacher who's so committed to her spiritual growth, but somehow it doesn't quite get that piece. So what I see for myself as a yoga practitioner, I do some teaching as well, is getting ahimsa front and center, because it is, as Samita said, the first ground rule, to celebrate not only yoga and veganism in terms of ahimsa, but yoga and vegetarianism as perhaps the first nutritional system presented to the world. When we talk about the food groups that the plant-based doctors recommend, those, with the exception of the dairy, were the same groups that the ancient yogis and those early Ayurvedic doctors were recommending as well. So we've got a real jump on the health thing. And then now, of course, the environment. Now, that wasn't an issue thousands of years ago. And yet nature, reverence for nature, finding our place within the natural world, has always been essential to yoga, and certainly to its sister science of Ayurveda. And if we can share that, and most importantly, if we can live it, I'm a big fan of attraction activism. If the way that each of us lives our lives as vegan yogis has something to offer someone else, then a lot of them are going to want to do what we're doing. So I'm just looking at our time. We have 4.5 minutes left. I want to save 1 minute for another beautiful blessing from Samita. But for now, I'd like to just open it up to my two co-panelists. Who has a thought?
Well, I'll go ahead and piggyback off of you, Victoria. You know, I didn't, oh, Samita, can you mute your mic for a second and then I'll pass it? There we go. You know, one of those things, and the ground rule of yoga, and you know, leading by example. I think if we can start showing other yoga practitioners the positive aspects of the practice and taking out that aspect of shame. You know, sometimes with veganism, with activism, we get so passionate that I think sometimes we can turn somebody off because they think we're better than, or we're doing, you know, we're putting them down. And if it can be done in a way where you are inspirational. My first yoga teacher back at Black Dog Yoga in Los Angeles, he was vegan. We didn't know, but the only thing he would do is every Friday he brought in vegan cookies, and that was his way of activism. And we all got excited over these peanut butter cookies, and then we eventually asked him for the recipe, which led to the book. But he had this pure, beautiful practice, and he was so kind and compassionate towards everybody that you just wanted to start living your life the way that he was. And I think if we can start doing more of that, we might be in a good place to inspire others to go vegan. Samita, did you want to add something?
I think Holly and me talked about this a while back, and we both feel the same way, because what happens, a lot of people feel uncomfortable because, you know, you say, oh, you're not vegan, how can you eat meat? We don't want to do that. We just want to introduce the thought process and the science behind it, and be gentle with the people. And, you know, I mean, like, just bring in the concept or the transformation in a very gentle way, you know, not to put anybody down, or not to say that, you know, I'm better than you, and, you know, you eat meat and I don't eat meat. And it's just a very, very personal choice, what a person should eat. But I think our responsibility is to educate people, and if we can do it in a gentle manner, in a gentle way. And this is very important, what Victoria also said, that, you know, the first step of the ladder in yoga is ahimsa. So this is not explained, you know. People just start off with postures, and then the whole focus goes into postures and breathing and how much you can bend and what you can do. But remember, the posture is just the third step out of the 8 step. And the first step, to be qualified, you have to have a plant-based diet. And another quick thought that came to my head was, and this is based on what Victoria was saying, that things have changed now. The suffering that the animals have to go through in this in this period, in this time, 21st century, is very sad. And ignorance is bliss. And I happen to see what happens, and I'm sure if you see it too, you will feel like nobody deserves that. So things were very different even 50, 100 years back. Nobody did what is done these days with the animals.
So true. Samita, I know that you want to close with another blessing chant. So it's time for that now.
Sure, Victoria. And I'd just like to say the first prayer was about connect. So, whenever we start something, we connect. And the closing prayer is about just honoring the consciousness and the creation. And I'll just chant it for all of us. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So this prayer means basically the consciousness is full and the creation is also full. And from this consciousness, this creation, which is also full, has emerged. And when this creation is merged in the consciousness, what remains is again wholesome and full. And Om, peace, peace, peace.
So beautiful, Samita. Thank you both. Everybody find us on Instagram, and thanks to Vivas and to the Global Vegfest. May you have a wonderful rest of the festival. Blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Victoria, Samita and Holly. What a wonderful presentation, all about yoga and how we can help to veganize it and educate people in the communities. And you're all wonderful. Thank you in particular to Samita for joining us all the way from India. And if you want to follow any of the women, their Instagrams are in the comments section.